You think the country went to over the past 4 years? You ain't seen nothing yet.
Some forms of parody are now illegal in California, and Elon Musk better watch out. The California woke scolds target satire and Elon Musk specifically. A eyebrow-raising comment from Trump about food prices, Matt Walsh stirs up more controversy, and a TikToker explains why she doesn't trust white people. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics, all from an independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around. And regardless, do hit that like button as we go along and do comment with your thoughts. I do read the comments. I take the time to see what you guys have to say. And I do pick a few to respond to on every episode. So do comment. And plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely read it on tomorrow's show. And now let's check in on California. I got to show you guys this video that is now going to be apparently illegal to share in the state of California. It's a parody video that circulated online in July that uses AI to spoof Kamala Harris. Let's take a look.
I, Kamala Harris, am your Democrat candidate for president because Joe Biden finally exposed his senility at the debate. Thanks, Joe. I was selected because I am the ultimate diversity hire. I'm both a woman and a person of color. So if you criticize anything I say, you're both sexist and racist. I may not know the first thing about running the country, but remember, that's a good thing if you're a deep state puppet. I had 4 years under the tutelage of the ultimate deep state puppet, a wonderful mentor, Joe Biden. Joe taught me rule number 1, carefully hide your total incompetence. I take insignificant things and I discuss them as if they're significant. And I believe that exploring the significance of the insignificant is in itself significant.
Talking about the significance of the passage of time, right? The significance of the passage of time. So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time, and there is such great significance to the passage of time.
Another trick is trying to sound black. I pretend to celebrate Kwanzaa, and in my speeches, I always do my best Barack Obama impression. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type. And okay, look, maybe my work addressing the root causes of the border crisis were catastrophic, but my knowledge of international politics is truly shocking.
The United States shares a very important relationship, which is an alliance with the Republic of North Korea. It is an alliance that is strong and enduring.
And just remember, when voting this November, it is important to see what can be, unburdened by what has been. And by what has been, I mean Joe Biden. You think the country went to over the past 4 years? You ain't seen nothing yet.
So sharing this AI-generated parody video will now be illegal in the state of California, according to Governor Gavin Newsom. At the time this video first circulated, he tweeted, "Manipulating a voice in an ad like this should be illegal. I'll be signing a bill in a matter of weeks to make sure that it is." Well, he followed through on that promise. And now, this week he tweeted, "I just signed a bill to make this illegal in the state of California. You can no longer knowingly distribute an ad or other election communications that contain materially deceptive content, including deep fakes." Of course, in a kind of ironic twist, the video is now going viral again in protest. Elon Musk shared it again and said, "The governor of California just made this parody video illegal in violation of the Constitution of the United States. Would be a shame if it went viral." So there is a lot to unpack here. On one level, the video is kind of crude and cringeworthy. A few parts of it are funny, but a little bit are too on the nose and a little over the top. But it is what it is. It's a clear attempt at satire, at political humor. Literally nobody could watch that video if they have higher than an IQ in the double digits. Nobody could watch that video and think it's real. She literally says, you think the country went to shit? You ain't seen nothing yet. Like, what candidate would ever say that in an ad? So the idea that this is deceptive when it's such obvious satire is kind of silly to me, unless you think the American people are idiots, which many progressives like Gavin Newsom really do think. They do look down on the American people. They do think we're stupid and dumb and need big daddy government to protect our simple little brains and our fragile little fifis. I, however, do not share that point of view. So I do just reject this categorically as an approach because I don't think Americans need to be protected from obvious satire and parody. There's also a First Amendment problem with this approach from Gavin Newsom. The Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled over the years, most famously in a case called Falwell v. Hustler, that parody and satire are forms of expression protected by the First Amendment. That means you can't just ban them entirely or try to censor or crack down upon them, even when it involves new forms of technology like artificial intelligence. So the governor's approach clearly goes too far, and I do think it will be challenged in court on First Amendment grounds and potentially struck down because, like I said, satire and parody are protected forms of free expression, and political speech is inherently protected. It's the most central part of the First Amendment, so there'll be a huge uphill battle for the California government to defend these new laws in court. Now, what I will say is that I think AI and deepfakes could potentially become an issue because the technology really is getting stunning. This one, you can tell it's AI voice if you listen closely, but it does sound like Kamala somewhat, and we're only getting closer to the point where it will be indistinguishable. So what I think might make sense is some sort of labeling requirement that videos must denote, and this could come from companies. This doesn't necessarily have to come from the government. This could come from YouTube is already doing this. I'll have to mark this video as contains AI content because I'm playing the clip. So YouTube's already doing this. Twitter could do this. Other platforms could do this, simply requiring labeling of AI-generated content. And I think that would be a fair and reasonable thing for companies and platforms to do to avoid confusion, because videos like this are pretty obvious satire, but there are other ones created with AI that sometimes are hard to distinguish from reality, and some people are a little bit gullible. So I think it's not that there's no issue here. It's that we don't want to empower government censorship and allow the state to crush parody and satire when it comes to criticizing their political allies. Like, that is obviously authoritarian and deeply, deeply problematic, but we can still address the issue of people being potentially misled by AI and other things through labeling requirements, either at the platform level, ideally, or potentially through some form of regulation down the line. But what we don't need is to empower state governments to be the speech police and the joke police and start cracking down on memes on the internet. So I'm with Elon on this one, and I think Gavin Newsom deserves all the trolling that he is currently receiving. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button while you're at it. And now we got to talk about a controversial response Trump just gave to a question about food prices after a quick break. So Trump was asked about high grocery prices, an issue that's top of mind for many Americans, and the response he gave was interesting. Let's take a look.
How are you going to bring down the cost of food and groceries?
Good. Very good. Thank you. So we have to start always with energy. Always. I don't want to be boring about it, but there's no bigger subject. It covers everything. If you make donuts, if you make cars, whatever you make, energy is a big deal. And we're going to get that. It's my ambition to get your energy bill within 12 months down 50%. If I can do that, we've done a hell of a job. 5-0, not 15, 50. Interest rates are going to follow, and actually they're going to follow for another reason. The economy is now not good, and interest rates, you'll see they'll do the rate cut and all the political stuff tomorrow, I think. And, will he do a half a point? Will he do a quarter of a point? But the reason is because the economy is not good. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do it. But we're going to get interest rates down, and we got to work with our farmers. Our farmers are being decimated right now. They're being absolutely decimated. And, one of the reasons is we allow a lot of farm product into our country, and we're going to have to be a little bit like other countries. We're not going to allow so much We're going to let our farmers go to work. And I don't know if you remember, I love the farmers because, I had many meetings as president. I had this gorgeous room with this beautiful table that seats about 35 people. And I was with the farmers. Usually everybody wants something. They all want subsidy. But I was with the farmers, and I think you might have been there, actually, Sarah. I said, look, fellas, we're going to get you such a beautiful subsidy, meaning I'm going to do things. And one of the people raises and, sir, honestly, we don't want a subsidy. This is the first time this ever happened to me. Everyone they want money. They want to build windmills. We want money with these windmills. Anyway, but you know what? It was amazing. He said, almost tears in his eyes, they were getting decimated. We don't want a subsidy.
Wow, he is always quite something to listen to. But there's a few points to be made about this interesting answer, because parts of it I think Trump is spot on, but parts of it I think he's really missing the mark. First and foremost, he is absolutely right to identify energy prices as key to the entire economy, because energy prices factor into the cost of transporting goods and services. So when the cost of energy is high, it has a ripple effect and increases prices on everything that you buy on the store shelf. So on that sense, he is right that if we can increase energy production to even higher levels, it's actually at pretty high levels now, but if we can get red tape out of the way, get the American energy sector going, and bring down the cost of gas and the cost of energy, then that will help decrease the prices of everyday goods and services that Americans rely on. So that part of the answer was pretty strong. It's when Trump gets to farmers that he starts to miss the mark by quite a large degree. Because, for example, he talks about limiting the amount of food products that are coming into America so our farmers here can do a better job or can compete better on the market. That would actually have the total opposite effect of what he was asked about, which is how to bring down grocery prices. If you start blocking the importation of food products into the country or restricting it or taxing it, well, what that will do is decrease the supply, which would mean higher prices for consumers. And that's how it's supposed to help the farmers here in America, because they'll be able to charge higher prices because foreign competition will be blocked. And when you have less competition, you have higher prices. So if your goal is to help out a special interest group, which is the American farming industry, which already gets insane amounts of subsidies from the federal government, then that would be what you might want to do. But if your goal is to help Americans who are struggling with high grocery prices, that's the exact opposite of the approach you should be taking. You should be seeking to reduce barriers and have more food coming into the country from Canada and Mexico and other countries we're allied with, from Vietnam, from South Korea, from Europe. And then it will lower prices for consumers who are struggling to get by, like this woman and her children and grandchildren who they're struggling to get by. Of course, we need to help these people out, and the prices of things are way too high, but this kind of, and economists would talk about it as a protectionist approach to economics that Trump sometimes echoes, of make everything in America and protect us from foreign competition. That's actually a recipe for higher prices, right? Because free trade brings down prices. It increases efficiency. Things can be made for much less and produced for much less and overseas in many cases. And then there are some things that we do better here in the US that we should focus on. But when we have free trade with other countries, and no, I'm not talking about adversaries like China necessarily, I'm talking about all the friendly countries that Trump also seems to want to restrict trade with, that's when we actually see lower prices and more economic growth and more efficiency. But Trump, I hope that maybe he jumbled up his words, but this does seem of a piece with his broader approach to economics these days, which is very focused on protectionism. But when it comes to lowering prices for Americans, that approach is exactly backwards. So I was disappointed to see him go down this line of thinking in response to what was a very important and very timely question from an audience member at his event. And now we've got to check in with Matt Walsh, who is stirring up yet more controversy with his latest hot take on Gen Z and sick days. Take a listen to Matt's controversial comments from a recent episode of his show, where he talked about Gen Z and them being ill-suited for the workforce and too snowflakey. And he went on this interesting soliloquy about taking sick days being something that really should almost never be done, in his view.
The younger generation is also more likely to use up their sick days than their older colleagues, recent studies have found. Side note on the sick day thing is and you know, this will be unpopular, especially with younger people, but you shouldn't be using sick days, okay? I've used sick days maybe twice in 7 years, and in both of those cases, because I lost my voice and I couldn't speak, you know, you can't blame me for that. It's impossible to do a podcast when you can't speak. And even then, I still, and anyone who has been watching the show for a while, you know this, I still came into the office and recorded a video with subtitles when I lost my voice, if you recall. But generally speaking, again, I know this is unpopular, but sick days are for children, okay? They're for kids in school who are trying to stay home so they don't have to take a test that day. Like, with rare exception, taking a sick day as an adult should be pretty embarrassing for you. Calling your boss and saying, sorry, I can't come in today, my tummy hurts, is humiliating. You need to be at work, okay? Adults don't have time to be sick. They don't have time for it. I was just having this conversation with my kids recently, actually, because I was kind of under the weather, and my kids were aware of that, and they said, well, so why are you going to work? I said, because I don't have time to be sick. Okay, I don't know, I can't be. I don't have time. But you are sick, yeah, but I don't have time for it. So it's like I'm operating as though I'm not.
Matt, my dude, read the room. You are a podcaster, as am I, right? No shade, but we're not exactly out here roofing houses for a living. So this blanket advice that people should almost never take sick days is a little tone deaf, coming from people with relatively cushy lines of work. Matt Walsh does this a lot with his kind of hyperbolic style of commentary, where he takes something with a grain of truth, or at least that might be a reasonable argument. Like, maybe Gen Z is taking too many sick days. Maybe they're not sucking it up when they just have a little sniffle and they really should. And then he takes it to kind of an absurd extreme, intentionally or unintentionally undercutting the original reasonable argument in the first place. And I think that's what he's doing here, because it is valid to say that people shouldn't just use all their sick days always and shouldn't just call out anytime they're feeling slightly under the weather. But the opposite extreme, to say people should almost never take a sick day and it's embarrassing and weak, is also silly, okay? Because if you're really sick, you probably can't do your job, depending on what your job is. Many people have manual labor. Many people have to interact with tons of people in person. And you also need to be responsible about communicable diseases and not spreading your sickness. If you have something contagious, not spreading it to hundreds of people at a customer service job, not bringing it into a restaurant with you if you are a food service worker, not going out there and getting all your colleagues sick or passing it on to kids, or if you're a teacher or whatever. That's another element here that he's totally ignoring, that it's actually in some ways irresponsible if you're contagiously sick to just suck it up and be a man and go into work anyway. I mean, if it's just a little sniffle or something, okay, but if you actually have a communicable sickness or disease, that's not fair to others to knowingly endanger them, or at least it may potentially get them sick. Actually, the responsible thing to do is to use some of your sick days, which do exist for a reason, Matt. Now, of course, people shouldn't just be taking sick days anytime they feel slightly stressed or anytime they have a sniffle. And Gen Z may be too fragile in many ways. I'm totally open to that critique. But it is almost cartoonishly absurd to flip to the opposite extreme. And it really does just seem like he does this for attention or to stir up controversy on purpose and say, people, it's embarrassing to take a sick day. Dude, again, you're a podcaster. Like, you and I make YouTube videos in a day, in our day-to-day work. It's a little different for us, right? He's filming this episode, I think, from a hotel room, right? You can do this with interacting with relatively few people, doesn't require tons of physical labor. So it's just a little bit out of touch to sit here and make these broad sweeping declarations about how people shouldn't take sick days, when maybe you'd feel differently if you were working in a factory or in a mine or something like that many Americans still do. It's just types like Matt Walsh are the first to critique out-of-touch liberal elites, and I often agree with them, but sometimes they can fall into some of those same mental traps in their own right. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with Matt Walsh, or do you agree with me? Do let me know in the comments below. And now we're going to react to a bizarre anti-white TikTok after a quick break. Now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
Today, this TikToker explains why she finds it hard to trust white people. Let's take a listen to her interesting perspective.
Here's another reason why I struggle to trust white people.
Oh?
I was at Home Depot today, and, I had an associate glazing the at me, like they do. It happens to us all the time. So I took the opportunity of her proximity to just ask her for help, because I didn't know where everything was. And she looks at me, and she goes, Well, why are you buying all this stuff? It's the landlord's responsibility to fix things in a rental. Ma'am, what did you say? And because I know that some of you were going to attempt to explain to me what she really meant, here's my question for you. Why didn't she first assume that I might be the landlord? Do you know what I'm saying? Why is her first assumption that I am the renter? Do you know what I mean? And I was so pissed off, but I don't have the privilege of being pissed off. I did have the satisfaction of saying, well, I'm a homeowner, so there's only one person who's going to be able to do it, and watching her shrivel up. But, you know, I just paid for my shit and I walked out. And it's these little microaggressions, right, that build up over time where you can't quite prove the racism because other white people are going to attempt to gaslight you and explain it away. But it is racism. And that is why I take it on a case-by-case basis. And I don't want to hear y'all say, I'm sorry and that sucks and I apologize on behalf of white people. I don't care. I'm just letting you know that, once again, this is an example of why I think the way I think.
So there's a lot to unpack here, which, by the way, guys, if you haven't noticed, that's what I say after I hear something kind of batshit. First, I mean, who really knows if this story is true? But just for argument's sake, let's assume that it is. Is this a racist incident or a microaggression? First up, well, microaggression is not a real concept, but is this a racist incident? Was this person maybe making a racist comment? Maybe, but I guess I'd say it's hard to say. She also could have just misunderstood something you said and thought that you mentioned having an apartment, or thought that something you said gave her the impression that you were a renter rather than a homeowner or a landlord. So without actually knowing the specifics of what was said, it's kind of hard to say. It's also possible she just looked at a black person and said, and just mentally assumed you weren't a landlord or you weren't wealthy enough to own a home, which I do think would be unfair. That'd be kind of stereotyping. That'd be a not a good thing to do, right? It would be definitely a little bit racially discriminatory. So if that was the case, I would say that's something she should maybe reflect on and try to avoid doing in the future. Although it's also not the end of the world, okay? It's really not. So hard to say on that one, whether this is truly an instance of racism or just maybe some confusion. But I do think it's safe to say that either way, it's not exactly an earth-shattering event, a victimizing or traumatizing incident in any real sense. If anything, it actually sounds like she was the one, the service person at Home Depot was the one who ended up feeling more embarrassed, and maybe rightfully so, hard to say, again, without more of the facts. But what I did want to touch on is the absolutely unhinged discourse and blanket discrimination that folks like this throw around on TikTok. This is why I don't trust white people. Excuse me, ma'am? Because you had one bad interaction with one white person that you potentially misunderstood, but even if it was a genuinely bad interaction, you then say, that's why you don't trust white people categorically. Babe, there's a word for that. It's called stereotyping. It's called discrimination. It's called racism. Imagine a person was mugged by a black person one time in New York City. And then they went around saying, and that's why I don't trust black people. We would all look at that person and be like, excuse me? First, we'd be sympathetic. We'd be like, oh, that's terrible. You were mugged. Then be like, and that's why I don't trust black people. We'd be like, oh, that's not fair. That's racist. That's discriminatory. You can't hold the actions of one individual against an entire group of people. Oh, wait, apparently you can. As long as that group is white people and as long as you're on the woke hellscape of TikTok. It's really shocking stuff. It's really vile stuff, honestly. It's hateful, it's bigoted, and it's divisive. And it's so wild to me that this kind of content gets lapped up by the seals on TikTok just clapping. And so many of them are actually woke white people who are like, so sorry, queen. Oh my God. And it's like, dude, she just racially insulted your entire demographic and you're now sucking up to her. Get a spine. It's a little pathetic for sure. And I do always just go back to one point about the TikTok stuff. TikTok regularly takes down my videos for various violations of community guidelines or hate speech, but you can literally just be openly racist against white people as much as you want, and she'll never get it taken down for hate speech or anything like that. the double standards are galling. I mean, if TikTok didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. Also, I just have to talk about this concept of microaggressions, which I find to be totally illegitimate. It is so infantilizing to members of a different minority group to suggest that minor verbal tics are somehow harmful to them. Actually, most people have pretty thick skin and would just roll with something like this and just point out, actually, no, I'm the homeowner. And then they say, oh, great. Okay, here's the stuff you need. They move on with their day. They wouldn't go to TikTok whining about it. They wouldn't go to microaggression. They wouldn't put it on a list to read to their therapist of all the microaggressions they've endured that week, because that's not the mark of a mentally stable adult. That's the mark of somebody who's incredibly mentally and emotionally fragile, which, unlike you potentially, I do not believe is the case for most members of minority groups. I actually think most of them are pretty darn resilient and would never think to deign themselves victims over something like this, let alone go whine about it to an audience of thousands and thousands of people on TikTok seeking sympathy. Just generally speaking, guys, we've got to get away from this collectivizing way of viewing the world, whether it's taking the actions of one immigrant or one black person and then drawing conclusions about entire demographics, or therefore holding it against other people who belong to those groups, or doing the same thing to white people. In any and all cases, that is a morally bankrupt approach to the world. It is a perspective that strips people of their individuality and holds things against them they have no control over. And it's deeply unfair and wrong, and it only serves to further inflame and divide our society. But other than that, you're doing amazing, sweetie. What did you guys think of this wild anti-white TikTok? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering, because this one definitely took a couple brain cells and just incinerated them. And now I'll wrap up today's show by reading a few of your comments from yesterday's episode. One person says, thanks, this is unlikely something you typically do, but I'd appreciate your movie review of Am I Racist by Matt Walsh. It's okay if you aren't inclined. You know, I do want to watch it. I'll probably try to stream it somewhere. I don't think I'm going to go to theaters, but when I do, I'll definitely give you guys an update on what I thought. Another person says, Scientific American hasn't been very scientific for a very long time. I grew up reading this magazine, but it's turned into complete garbage. Yeah, that's one of the sad things about the last couple of decades, is watching a lot of the things we grew up with go woke. And as Trump says, this is one of my favorite lines, everything that goes woke goes to shit. Another person writes, every time Hillary gets on TV, I remember to be thankful we dodged that bullet. Yeah, I got plenty of criticisms of Trump and problems with him, but yeah, her presidency would have been a nightmare in its own right in many ways. Another person says, to me, getting mad at a stranger for not knowing your pronouns is like getting mad at a stranger for not knowing your name. Yeah, I get what you're going for here. It's just not reasonable to expect people to know something that you haven't told them. But I think it's even more unreasonable in the case of pronouns, because typically most people do align with pronouns that go with their biology. So when you're a minute, rare exception, to expect people to know that or predict that is particularly unfair, I think. Another person says, I feel sorry for servers dealing with this crap. A server calls you sir or ma'am because they don't know your name. That's it. Not everything is an attack. Yeah, I do too. There's that one trans creator who goes around and berates English as a second language immigrant wait staff who call the TikToker sir, in their view, erroneously. And I feel bad waiting. I've never done it. I've never actually waited tables. I worked at a Subway as my first job, but I never actually served or bussed or anything like that. But I've heard it's brutal and really hard. And just then having people on your back about word choice when you're just trying to be polite must be really frustrating. Another person says, Brad, where do you get your news? I try going back and forth between liberal and conservative places to find where the truth lies, but I think that method is causing an anxiety problem. Well, I recommend actually checking out Ground News. And I'll put my affiliate link in the description if you want to check it out. But they do a good job of summarizing the top stories and then linking to you about what the left, the right, and the center are saying. I also read something called Tangle News, which I'll link to, which is by my friend Ike Saul, and he does an amazing job of summarizing what people on the right are saying, what people on the left are saying, and what the facts are, and then also giving his perspective. Those are two things I consult. I also have highly personalized feeds on things like Twitter and TikTok where I get a lot of information. And then I check out a wide variety of news sources directly on their websites, everything from left-leaning stuff to really right-wing stuff. So a diverse diet is good, but if you can't handle that, because it would give you anxiety, I totally get that. I recommend something like Ground News or Tangle that aggregates it for you and kind of distills it in a palatable way. All right, everybody, that is it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Do make sure you subscribe if you haven't yet. Do hit that like button and do comment with your thoughts. I do read the comments and I love hearing what you guys think. And I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely read it on the next show. And with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.